Hello, and thank you for joining Deseret News Events for a discussion of Fulton versus Philadelphia, this term's top religion case in front of the Supreme Court. I'm Kelsey Dallas, a national religion reporter and editor for the Deseret News and avid follower of religious freedom lawsuits. In the past 5 years, I've written more than 36 stories about at least 10 different Supreme Court cases, including this term's clash between a Catholic foster care agency and the city of Philadelphia. The case originated a few years ago when Philadelphia officials announced they'd no longer partner with faith-based agencies that didn't want to assess whether same-sex couples are suitable foster parents. Catholic Social Services and 2 religious foster moms filed a lawsuit in response, arguing that the city was trampling their religious exercise rights. The Supreme Court's ruling in Fulton versus Philadelphia could redefine not just the balance between religious and LGBTQ rights, but the entire religious freedom landscape. It could set a new standard for how government officials accommodate religious beliefs. To discuss the case, I'm joined by Lori Windham, senior counsel for the Becket Fund for Religious Liberty, who's won more than a dozen cases in federal appellate courts and testified before Congress on religious freedom issues. She represents Catholic Social Services and the 2 foster moms in this case, and argued that Philadelphia officials are discriminating against people of faith in front of the Supreme Court last November. Lori, thanks so much for joining me.
Kelsey, thanks so much for having me to discuss this case.
So Lori, you and I both know that this isn't the first case faith-based foster care agencies have been involved in, and they've also been the subject of state-level bills and even debates in Congress. So what happened to turn faith-based foster care agencies' stance on same-sex marriage into such a hot-button issue?
Well, I think it's important to realize that our foster care system was really pioneered by religious organizations who for many years and centuries in the United States and millennia, if you go elsewhere, have been taking in orphans and finding homes for kids who needed homes, permanently through adoption or for the short term when their parents were unable to care for them, as in foster care. And so what's happened now is with same-sex marriage becoming the law of the land, first state by state and then nationwide in the Obergefell decision in 2015, what we've seen is a clash in different places across the country between state and local governments who are changing the rules regarding marriage and adoption and foster care, and religious foster and adoption agencies who've been doing this work for a long time and have religious teachings on marriage that they're bound to follow.
So as you mentioned, faith-based foster care agencies are really core to the history of foster care and adoption work, and that's pretty much remained true even as city governments started getting more involved, and state governments and even the federal government. But now we have situations where cities like Philadelphia say, we're a little worried about the treatment of same-sex parents. We don't want them to be frozen out of this system. And so they're trying to force Catholic Social Services and similar agencies to change their policies. Why do you think there should be room for a religious exemption?
I think that we need to recognize the wonderful work that's being done by religious agencies to serve children, to serve families. Catholic Social Services in Philadelphia serves kids regardless of their race, their religion, their sex, their sexual orientation. They partner with foster moms like Sharon L. Fulton and Tony Sims Bush. 70% of the children that they serve are Black. Many are coming from poor areas of Philadelphia. All of them have suffered abuse and neglect. And so they're doing really important work in the city. The question is, now that the city has changed its rules, does the answer have to be that this Catholic agency is excluded from the system, or can we have diverse agencies serving a diverse city?
Those who are rooting for exclusion, as you called it, have said that such a step is necessary to root out anti-gay discrimination. I just wondered how you respond to that claim. Like, would you refer to Catholic Social Services policy as discrimination?
Certainly not. And I think it's worth noting here, and this was something that came up in the oral argument before the Supreme Court, not one same-sex couple had even approached Catholic Social Services asking for a home study. This all came about because a reporter called and asked about what the policy was. And the policy was, if a same-sex couple were to approach them asking for a home study and an endorsement, Catholic Social Services would refer them to one of 29 other agencies that can provide that endorsement for them. In fact, there are 3 agencies in the city that actually have a special seal of approval for their expertise in serving the LGBTQ community. And so this is not a question of somebody being kept out of the foster system. This is a question of whether you can have agencies with different kinds of specializations in the city.
As we've talked about in this case, there's an opportunity here for the city to acknowledge that agencies like Catholic Social Services have their own beliefs and they want to operate according to them. But I think others would say there's an opportunity for Catholic Social Services to adjust its policy, like organizations like Bethany Christian Services have done earlier this year. So at any point in this case, has Catholic Social Services considered adjusting its policy on evaluating same-sex couples?
No, they haven't. They're following the Catholic Church, which they're part of, and the Catholic faith. Other faith groups have come to different theological decisions on this question and this issue. And what I think that really highlights is that there are a lot of options available out there for same-sex couples. It doesn't mean that you need to go around shutting down the Catholic agencies.
And would you say that there are some prospective foster parents that particularly seek out Catholic Social Services that maybe would be less likely to foster without a faith-based agency as an option?
Absolutely, and that's true of the foster moms in this case. Cecilia Paul, who passed away during the case, had cared for over 100 children, been doing this work for more than 40 years, and she said she couldn't imagine starting over with another agency. She was Catholic and she went to an agency that affirmed her faith. For Sharon L. and for Tony, the same is true for them. They're Catholic. They chose an agency that shares and affirms their faith. They rely on their faith as a source of strength and comfort, doing a really hard job being mothers to these children. And so you would be taking away something. You're taking away more than just an agency. You're taking away a source of religious help and support for these foster families.
How has this lawsuit disrupted Catholic Social Services agencies' work? What have they been up to since 2018?
So in 2018, the city of Philadelphia said, we will not allow any more foster children to be placed with the families who partner with Catholic Social Services. There are children who were already with those families, and those children have been allowed to remain with those families. Some of them have been adopted, some of them have returned to their birth families, but there are still some children who are in Catholic Social Services care. And so they continue on in those homes, but those numbers have continued to decline as this case has gone on for 3 years now. And so there are many fewer children being served by Catholic Social Services today.
And so if the Supreme Court rules against Catholic Social Services, do you anticipate they would basically have to close up shop in Philadelphia?
They would have to close down their foster agency, most likely. Obviously, it depends exactly what the Supreme Court said, whether they got another day in court or whether it just ended it. But the stance that Philadelphia has taken and is defending here is pretty strong. They've said, unless you will provide these home study certifications, then we're not going to allow any more foster children to be placed with your agency, period.
So as it's clear from our discussion, this case is very focused on the situation in Philadelphia, but I anticipate it having ripple effects across the country. So would all sorts of faith-based foster care agencies be affected by this ruling?
Certainly, we have agencies across the country who are anxious to know how this is going to turn out and what it's going to look like. There have been challenges to faith-based agencies in Michigan, in New York, in Texas, and in other places. And so they're looking to the Supreme Court for guidance. There were actually 10 states that came together on an amicus brief asking the Supreme Court to take up this case because they said, we don't know what the rules are. We really need some clarity here so that we can understand what it is that we need to do with faith-based agencies going forward.
And what about the religious freedom landscape more generally? Do you feel like this could set a new precedent for the way governments accommodate faith groups in a variety of contexts?
Absolutely. And one of the big questions in this case is, how do we interpret the free exercise clause? I mean, it's such a basic question, and yet it's one that the lower courts have really struggled with, and the Supreme Court hasn't given a lot of guidance on. when it comes to this issue of a clash between a law and a religious group or religious organization. And so the Supreme Court has actually signaled it may reconsider some older precedents that made it harder for religious people to win their cases. And we're hopeful what we'll see is a clear standard that helps everyone to know what the rules are, and a standard that allows religious people to be protected when exercising their First Amendment rights.
Well, I really look forward to covering sort of what comes out of this case. Lori, we're coming to the end of our time. Was there anything I didn't touch on that you wanted to address?
Yeah, I wanted to mention that we talk about, agencies and policies and precedents, but there are real families and real children who are looking to figure out what is going to happen here. What does this mean for me? Can I bring more foster children into my home? Can I adopt more children? And so, I'm really looking forward to getting the decision in this case, because I hope we'll see some really good changes on the ground in Philadelphia.
Yes, that's an important reminder for me and other journalists to remember the humans at the heart of this. Thank you again so much, Lori, for joining me for this Deseret News event. I'm Kelsey Dallas for the Deseret News.